Eskom was established 100 years ago in 1923. A year before, the Electricity Act of 1922 had laid the foundation of the development of an electricity supply industry in the country. One of the authors of the act was Dr. Hendrik Johannes van der Bijl, a young research scientist who the then Jan Smuts government had appointed to advise him on industrial development. This gave birth to enviable infrastructure.
The mandate that Smuts gave to Bijl was to consider energy and steel. And so with energy, then coal had to be the preferred mode of production of energy. And Bijl then spawned the whole infrastructure. ISCO followed on the coal. I mean, by the 40s, Korea didn't have the infrastructure that South Africa had.
Ihotla says it was because of the work that Smuts and Bijl had started that South Africa could be referred to as a developmental state well before China did. Many other companies like the Industrial Development Corporation and the CSIR were created during that time to strengthen Eskom's mandate.
They took advantage of the situation that South Africa was not at war during the First and the Second World War, but it was providing materials to the war, and this became the basis in part of massive industrialization that South Africa had. There was ISCO after Eskom, and Eskom was at the heart of this. In the main, it was about providing electricity that is affordable, and that will form the basis for industrialization in South Africa. And the twin arrangement was steel, which was ISCO, and Eskom, that then spawned all the industries. Of course, financing became an issue, and Bijl saw that creating IDC was very important so that they can finance all these other industries.
The former statistician says it is important to reflect on this history to save the utility. The utility was later corporatized, which some argue was a bad move that led to it attracting other interests and not providing affordable electricity.
Others started saying, no, you must increase tariffs because Eskom is below world comparators. So the electricity should increase the tariffs. And then, of course, I mean, as President Mbeki admitted that they didn't take advice from science in 1998-97 when they were approached that shortly we will soon have shortage of energy given an increase in economic activity. But of course, they took measures by 2007, and the Medupi and Kusili were commissioned.
100 years later, the utility's celebration is overshadowed by the fact that the company is unable to provide the very service that forms part of its founding objective. Professor Yanni Rousseau says Eskom's performance of the last 15 years overshadows its history.
Eskom's past 15 years overshadow the long and illustrious history of the organization. That's a very sad outcome. And unfortunately, in the midst of all this, we don't see a plan on how Eskom will move forward out of its current problems.
Eskom is currently sitting on a mountain of challenges, from continuing rolling blackouts, allegations of corruption, to debt-riddled balance sheet and a revolving door of bosses. But Professor Rousseau says it is not the first time that the organization has fallen on hard times.
There was also a period in the 1980s when things didn't go well at Eskom for exact opposite reason to the problems we have now. Eskom at that period over-invested in electricity generation capacity on a wrong assumption of South Africa's economic growth potential going into the 1980s. Eskom was of the view that South Africa would grow very rapidly in the 1980s, that electricity demand would grow with it, and invested accordingly. And then Eskom had to put some of its generation capacity in storage. They call it mothballing at that point in time. Now, this is not the first time that Eskom has problems, but it's a problem of a different nature that Eskom is suffering at the moment.
In fact, about 20 years ago, the company was viewed as one of the best electricity generators in the world, but constant mismanagement has brought the entity to where it is today.
So Eskom was really something that South Africans could have been very proud of, and we no longer are very proud. We have no reason to be proud of Eskom because of the mess Eskom is in. So that pride has disappeared.
With all the challenges that the utility has faced, it has achieved some good things like electrifying the majority of South African households, something that many countries in the continent still have not managed to do. 90% of South African homes have been electrified as opposed to an average of 17% in the rest of Africa. The project manager for climate justice at Rosalux, Dr. Roland Ngam, says there are aspects of the utility that should be lauded.
Post-1994, electricity in South Africa really is almost a human right, because in very few African countries you see this aspect of load shedding management happening. You have the economic centers with power and the rest of the country is in the dark, because sometimes you don't even have transmission lines. Also, the labor force has completely changed with the transformation with women and Black South Africans in top management positions. And obviously, we can also include the fact that you have a lot of retrofits that have been done to make the coal fleet much cleaner. And also recently, also trying to add green capacity onto its fleet. So all these aspects really are to be lauded.
Dr. Ngam points a finger at government's failure to move with speed in taking and implementing key policy decisions to address the utility's liquidity challenges.
For example, whether to make Eskom private or not has been a major problem, because that has crippled the utility's ability to get the kind of liquidity it needs for its operations.
Looking ahead, there's a mixed picture of the utility's future given where it is today, but experts agree that the future looks more green than ever before, and it lies in renewable energy that is abundant.
Private generation is going to take over a lot of the electricity needs of South Africa. The government has now given tax breaks in the last budget, especially for businesses, to install solar panels. That will result in lower demand for Eskom's electricity. So as a result of that, there will be less demand on Eskom. So Eskom might be able to start moving the country to lower stages of load shedding as private generation capacity comes on stream. Secondly, I have no doubt that we will have to see much more private sector involvement in Eskom, especially on the generation side. In my view, it's necessary for Eskom to sell some of its power stations to the private sector to sort out generation.
Eskom, as it transforms, because the National Transmission Company of South Africa has already been created. It just needs its management to be put in place. And the integrated resource plan shows that the country is going to add probably about 40 gigawatts of energy within the next 20 years. 20 gigawatts of that is going to be green. And so we have to celebrate that in light of some of the climate catastrophes that we are seeing in Mozambique and in Mpumalanga today.
In the final analysis, it is energy in the air that will be generated, and that's the summit of what we call renewable energy, the one in abundance that you cannot exhaust, but you can use by pushing air through these methods of Michael Sanko, and energy can be free. That's where the future is. How that is organized and mobilized through society, I think, has to go back to the thinking of Bale and Smarts, where this must be affordable, abundant, and form the basis for industrialization. That's where the future is.
Liabo, Setho, SABC News, Johannesburg.